holiness, as patriarch.
With so much depressing news in the world, there is one silver lining. Radiation from Fukushima will probably not kill you, or even riddle your body with cancer. That story coming up in a moment.
It's the 18th of the 7th, 2012. Hold your breath. TEPCO just announced they started removing fuel rods from spent fuel pool number 4. Now they're only removing a few of the new fuel rods. They're not spent fuel rods, so they're not highly radioactive, and it's okay for them to hit the open air. They definitely got pictures posted and a couple reports off of E&E News, Yahoo Japan, and another newspaper. I'll provide the links below, of course. Enjoy while you can, everybody. Thanks.
Here is an interesting weather anomaly caught by suspicious observers.
You might remember we await the meeting of these alleged ship trails, contrails, whatever they're calling them, with the hurricane moving north off the coastline. I've heard folks say they're going to strengthen this thing and slam it into California. I think it looks like it's weakening. Another day may tell the story.
The cover story is as weak as any I've heard. If they mean the ship's wake, not even worth considering. If they mean the ship's engine exhaust, still not very likely. Even if all the ships coordinate their movements over such a large area, not all of their streams would persist depending upon local conditions. So that's a no-buy as well. So what is it? HARP? Or could it be some kind of chemical dispersant, similar to that used in the Gulf oil crisis, but designed to soak up incoming radiation instead of oil? That was my first impression, given this next story from Japan.
Since the nuclear accident at Fukushima Daiichi, experts in Japan and abroad have expressed concern about the safety of the fuel rods stored in reactor number 4. The fuel pool contains more than 1,500 rods, the highest number at the plant, and could pose a threat in the event of another earthquake. The plant's operator, Tokyo Electric Power Company, says it's ready to perform a trial run for the removal of the fuel rods. The trial run is part of efforts to decommission the plant. It will involve removing 2 unused rods from the spent fuel pool at Reactor 4 and transferring them to a nearby storage facility. The Japanese government approved on Thursday the safety measures for the test. They include checking radiation levels with an underwater camera to select unused fuel rods. The special container used for the transfer will be attached to 4 cables for extra security. TEPCO says it cannot reveal the date of the test for security reasons. If successful, the utility plans to start removing the rest of the fuel rods in 2013.
Some people claim the KHOU 11 News I-team has uncovered a conspiracy of the highest order, and this involves radiation in your drinking water.
Last night we told you how for years Texas state officials hid the amount of radiation they were finding in tap water. And tonight, the 11 News I-team reports it appears the state's top politicians have been in on the plan.
Even the governor was informed, and investigative reporter Mark Greenblatt is here now with more. Mark?
Greg, Lucy, for months, we fought with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, trying to get access to these documents and emails like this. And it took the Attorney General to finally get them released. And it was only then that we discovered, perhaps, what the TCEQ didn't want us or you to know.
It's a conspiracy at the TCEQ of the highest order.
Tom Smith of the consumer advocacy group Public Citizen is alarmed.
The documents have indicted the management of this commission in a massive cover-up.
Alarmed because of something we uncovered.
To convince people that our water is safe to drink when it is in fact not.
Recently, we reported how the state of Texas hid from the public just how much radiation was really in our drinking water, cutting and lowering the amounts detected in government lab tests. But now, because of these documents, we know that some of the state's most prominent politicians knew all about it.
What was the first sign?
Sore throat.
Brenda Haynes remembers when her doctor found it.
He checked me. He's like, wait, there's a lump here. There's a little... And I'm like, what?
A lump. And after numerous tests, it was clear at just 30 years old, Brenda Haynes had thyroid cancer.
I mean, what can you do? I mean, I'm sorry.
With the help of surgery, Brenda survived. But today, she's angry. Do you feel like they put you at risk?
Yes, I do.
You see, Brenda's neighborhood gets its water from Harris County Municipal Utility District number 105, where state tests originally showed their water having more radiation than allowed by federal law. But each year, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality stepped in and improperly lowered the actual test results by always subtracting each test's margin of error, sometimes lowering the result by 50%, often below the legal radiation limit. And so for years, Mud 105 never warned the community with a notice like this about their real problem.
We were put at more risk than what we thought.
And while they don't know if their tap water caused her cancer, Brenda's husband says when his wife was sick, drinking any radiation was the last thing she needed.
If years ago you would have been told, would you have been making different choices for what you would be drinking?
Well, absolutely.
What's worse, the EPA had already told states not to lower water radiation results in this December 2000 federal rule. And now, our uncovered emails show what happened next was not a mistake. Take this note from a TCEQ manager saying there may have been some EPA guidance on not subtracting, but this has been the practice in Texas since day one. And this option of not subtracting was thoroughly discussed with the commissioners, the top leadership of the agency. And so, we were directed to maintain the current methodology for subtracting. And this TCEQ report to the Texas Water Advisory Council tells us why. That maintaining the subtraction will eliminate approximately 35 violations, keeping the water providers in those communities off the EPA's radar. And this same report went to the state Speaker of the House, Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst, and even Governor Rick Perry. And yet the practice continued.
I believe local first, state second, federal government third.
Meet Kathleen Hartnett-White, the chair of the TCEQ Commission. At the time, commissioners decided to ignore the feds.
As my memory serves me, that made incredibly good sense.
Because while White is not a scientist, she says those she did consult with thought the EPA standards were too protective and costly.
We did not believe the science of health effects justified EPA setting the standard where they did.
But in fact, the EPA regulations have been supported by wide-ranging studies, like this work by the National Academy of Sciences, written by more than a dozen of the world's top radiation scientists. But White insists,
I have far more trust in the vigor of the science by which TCEQ assesses than I do EPA.
But instead of fixing water testing results, why didn't the agency take on the EPA's rule openly in court?
There are legal challenges because of law, not because of science, that are almost impossible to win.
And so, White says, trust her. Texas knows best.
But what if you're wrong?
Well, when you have, there's all kinds of ways.
But what if you're wrong and EPA was right?
Well, I don't see, what do you mean?
What if you're wrong and EPA is right about there being a danger at that level?
It would be regrettable.
Radiation is a gamble. Well, do you feel lucky? Every time you incur genetic damage from the passing of an ionizing particle, you stand a chance that one or more areas will be affected, which will send the cell into the cascading effects, which inevitably result in the rise of cancerous cells. And we have had layer upon layer of incoming radioactive particles laid down on our ocean and continents. Remember, we have had 3 full meltdowns, as finally admitted by TEPCO long after the damage was done. And as noted in this final segment, we're only measuring a few isotopes, if any at all. And here's the good news.
They totally ignore the amount of radiation that's going on. And even activists like Senator Wyden, I'm absolutely appalled that I haven't heard an answer back. Now, of course, you just told me this morning before the show that Senator Wyden's office probably won't respond if you don't live in the state. I presented this idea about doing radiation detection using aircraft, but this problem is already released hundreds of times more radiation than Chernobyl. And that means, according to Dr. Bernhoff, has already poisoned people to the point where every single individual tested in their urine showed radioactive thorium here in California, and he checked with his colleagues across the country in the academy, and every other doctor doing urine testing has detected thorium. So everyone, not without exception, has some level of radioisotopes: strontium, cesium, thorium, americium. All these radioisotopes are now bioaccumulating, and of course we just reported last week the Japanese study of California almonds showing 0.02 becquerels per kilogram in California almonds. 100% of the bluefin tuna caught off of San Diego has been poisoned with radioactive strontium. It just goes on. And this idea that, and cesium, and this idea that we're quote safe and we're just going to have maybe a slow increase over the next 5 years of doubling the radiation is a fairy tale. Yeah, it's really an obscene fairy tale. And of course we lack data. We want to have concrete data, so we neither exaggerate things nor play it down, or realize that certain segments of the population, the unborn, which are 10 million to 100 billion times more sensitive to radiation, and the elderly or anybody with any serious illness or a weakened tissue, let's say a stealth infection of TB or anything else. This also increases the risk of plagues. We've already had the release now of resistant TB and rubella in Japan, and I expect we're going to have multiple plagues coming out of the radiation toxic zones where the weakened population is a perfect host to develop superbacteria and viruses.
Yes, and that's a lot of people, are only concerned with cancer, getting cancer from this down the road, but there are so many other conditions that can come up.
I did an analysis of the Chernobyl disaster, and it was apparent that in Chernobyl, most of the people would be lucky if they got cancer, because most of them died of vascular disease, because most people don't realize oxidative stress, the first thing that happens is cortical damage to the brain, so you become decorticate, especially the frontal lobes are highly metabolically active. You develop eye problems, radiation retinopathies, and cataract changes, and you develop changes to any highly metabolic tissues, including mitochondria, immune system failure, and the most common things are actually vascular disease early on, like heart attacks and strokes. So people acutely exposed after Chernobyl, many of the young men died in their 20s and 30s of heart attacks and strokes and other vascular events like deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism. They didn't live long enough to get cancer.
And we're starting to realize, too, that cesium has almost immediate effects on the heart muscle.
Oh, yeah, you can give enough radioactive cesium because cesium is a very powerful beta emitter and gamma emitter. What it does is it immediately displaces potassium and causes a toxic effect in the conduction bundles, and it can cause cardiac arrhythmias or a toxic tachyarrhythmia that can be almost immediately fatal. So if there's a massive surge in cesium 137, you can have a whole bunch of people that are teetering, and most people don't realize by the time you get into the 7th decade, 10% of the population have got chronic atrial fibrillation, which is a major contributor to death.
And so many people don't realize a lot of these studies that are just coming to light, too, are only measuring 1 or 2 different isotopes when there were hundreds of isotopes that were released from the reactors.
Exactly. Yeah,
So you see, the good news was a little misleading. It only seems that we're not going to get cancer because we're going to die before we get that far. Finally, this just in a segment from RT showing that the Pacific is probably only now showing us the tip of the iceberg. Live long and prosper.
Fears are rising in the U.S. that the popular bluefin tuna caught off the West Coast contains radiation. Scientists say last year's nuclear disaster in Japan is to blame, but some claim these radioactive findings may only be the tip of the iceberg. RT's Martina Kochanova reports.
This summer, Californian fishermen are ready to inspect their catch closer than ever before.
The word radiation creates fear in people.
The reason for such concern lies in the latest discovery by scientists that bluefin tuna caught off the Californian coast contain radioactive isotopes brought over from the waters of Japan. It's led many to believe the scale of disaster was far greater than Tokyo's authorities have ever admitted. Last year's devastating earthquake and tsunami not only killed thousands, but also knocked out the Fukushima nuclear plant, spilling uncontrolled amounts of radiation into the atmosphere, soil, and sea. The Japanese government has been accused in the past of failing to provide full information about the incident and of downplaying the dangers.
The fact that the reactors were in full meltdown, which was known about by the government literally within days of the incident taking place and was not actually reported in the media for months afterwards, which is almost unthinkable.
The news that migratory fish may now be bringing that radioactivity across the Pacific has sparked a media frenzy in the U.S.
This is the first time such a large migrating fish has been shown to carry radioactivity so far.
This next item made a lot of U.S. consumers sit up and take notice.
They've actually found low levels of radiation in seafood off the coast of California. That raises a lot of alarm bells.
But there are fears that radiation in bluefin tuna is only the first sign of much worse disaster to come for the West Coast.
Radiation is coming across the Pacific in the ocean currents, contaminating all of the sea life. It's been completely hidden. It's a covert.
Radiation experts believe the real scale of the nuclear disaster will not be known for many decades, as the radiation released during the meltdown is accumulating in the global environment.
Later this summer, scientists will repeat their study on migratory fish, but this time on a far greater scale than before and taking in a number of different species. Experts say this will provide a real test of just how much radiation has been flowing across from Japanese waters to American shores. Madina Kushno, RT reporting from Los Angeles, California.